Fine, I didn't want to use these ley lines anyway. You know what the most awkward time to run out of juice is? Yeah, when the boss is about to blow. With the climb through Dawntrail done, we are finally back to the Mentor Roulette grind. I had to level up some jobs, do some role quests, and, of course, catch up on some Endwalker extreme clears to get my foot back in the door. This time, how we will do this is that I will do about 10 Mentor Roulette duties with each job, which itself will take a while. In fact, I will have doubled my Mentor Roulette clears by the time we get through all the 21 jobs. With that said, as my first job to 100 was Black Mage, we started with Black Mage, and we had a decent variety of content for the 10 duties. We start with E1N, or Eden's Gate Resurrection, with what appears to be a first-timer machinist, maybe? Early in the fight, all the DPS got targeted with circle AoEs, so I move away from the healer near me so they wouldn't have to move. My mistake here is forgetting that it placed an AoE afterwards that I had to step out of. Fortunately, it did not kill me. Looking at the count of heavy debuffs, it looks like a lot of players had the same issue. After this point, you may recall what I said at the end of the last Mentor Roulette episode, that knowing that something is coming, but not exactly remembering when, can be a problem. Here, I'm waiting for the intermission to happen, but I don't remember what it is called, so my ley lines just sit there. For like a good 30 seconds before I go, whatever, I'll just use it now. And that's when the intermission happens. While I was holding ley lines during a mechanic where I probably wouldn't have been able to sit in the ley lines very much, I held them for so long that the full duration had passed anyway. So we go on to bursting on the ads without ley lines. And then disaster strikes as cutscene forces my Umbral Ice to drop. Hopefully, I will have recovered full MP by the time it is over. Yes indeed. And we simply finish up the fight as normal. For Duty 2, we land in one of the optional max level dungeons of Dawntrail, so if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp here. With that said, we go to Ghost Park, or Strayborough Deadwalk, the one everyone loves, right? The first boss especially is quite a hoot, but it really boils down to 2 gimmicks, and me explaining them to you doesn't make them any less frustrating to deal with. The first one is the Falling Nightmare, which summons a head over everyone that you simply have to dodge. If you don't, oops, fully pacified and silenced for 10 seconds. The other gimmick is Team Spirit, which is the real killer of this fight. The outer ring is filled with children? And they gradually all start to choose a target and dash towards their current location as a slow-moving orb-like mechanic. If you get hit by them, you get stuck in place for 5 seconds. Just enough for most of the other mechanics to strike you. Not to mention, if you do get grabbed, the falling nightmare heads will appear above you and drop on you with no means of escape. So getting grabbed also means 10 seconds of doing nothing. Fun. The fact this boss has a lot of other things you need to avoid makes this quite an insane fight to try and keep maximum uptime on. Both as melee and as mage have I found good reason to sometimes just stop for a sec and survive. What really makes this fight so cruel is that these dashing children don't play nice with latency. If your connection is over a certain threshold, it certainly appears like they charge you like rugby players, while if your connection is good, you can sometimes snake your way perfectly between 2 without worry. Watching my play here, you can probably guess which camp I'm in, considering I don't get hit, but I did have one point where I had to abandon an astral fire state due to having to move too much. The fact the children dash at your current location means you can bait them, but this is hardly helpful advice when this duty is frequently ran with randoms that might not be working together with you anyway. For the second boss, the only tip I can really give here is that the teacups seem to have patterns to how they move, but I'm not still entirely sure on that. Sometimes it seems like they always shift their position a full 180 degrees from where they started. Other times, it's just 90 degrees. After that, there's a pack before the final boss with 2 giant dolls. You probably noticed. My advice here is if your healer or even your tank seems to be having a rough time with them, it might be preferable to single target one of them down extra hard. Otherwise, cleaving them evenly means there will be 2 targets for AoE components on attacks. For the final boss, I have 2 tips. The first one is that as long as you are in the correct state between real and ghost, the spread markers won't hurt you. The second tip is when the boss combines Memorial Marsh with Poltergeist, try to position yourself in front of the line of ghosts, so that the Wraith will spawn on that side. That way, you can stay in melee range while also moving far enough away. For duty 3, we go to the second trial of Dawntrail, and if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp. With that warning out of the way, the duty is of course Everkeep, with what looked like 4 first-timers. I'm a bit surprised that none of the Phase 1 mechanics makes it to the extreme version at all. Like, for example, these circling in and out blades could be challenging to deal with while doing other mechanics on top. Like, imagine doing conga line while these circle in on you. Relative to normal difficulty boss mechanics, I still think that Volok with the horizontal blades is particularly tough. You get a lot of time to process what is happening, but it still feels difficult to figure out in the moment while also dealing with your rotation and things like that. It is a good pick for a mechanic that is expanded upon in Extreme. What is a bit scary for a normal mechanic is that while you can live 1, you are at the mercy of whether your healers can bring you up again in time for Actualize, which still hurts like wow on normal. Unless you're a tank, I suppose. For duty 4, things mellow out a lot as we go to the Guildhest All's Well That Ends in the Well, which I use as an opportunity to practice low-level Black Mage AoE on the move. Although I was reminded I was below level 35 in the middle of it all when I messed up my state. Nothing special aside from that happened. In this level range, I think the best you can really do as a Black Mage on the move is repeatedly applying Thunders with Transpose as you run along, and try your best to do what you can in between, with like Scathe, I guess. For duty 5, we then go to the Guildhest Shadow and Claw, where I was reminded that the eye itself explodes for circle AoE damage, not raid-wide damage. Beyond this, nothing special happened. For duty 6, I was an 8-minute replacement in Orbonne Monastery, meaning I missed Mustadio. On the Thunder God, we had a pretty amusing situation where it seemed like the Sage preferred to spam Evcration Prognosis to heal us up. Somehow, we all got fully healed in time still, but it was quite funny. The sound of Evcration Prognosis is a dead giveaway, without even looking at the party list. The Crush armor mechanic is one that often causes problems, so I would like to explain this briefly. One player from each raid is tethered. A moment after, they get hit for damage and get a physical vulnerability debuff on them. Take note that both this attack and the boss's auto attacks are physical. This means that you have to pass this tether around so that each player only takes 1 hit at a time. The thing that causes this to be a problem is if the tank takes the tether. If they take it, then the Thunder God's auto attacks will hit for way over 50% of the tank's HP bar per swing. So you will need heavy defensives or even an invuln to survive until that debuff runs out. The general advice here is that the tank does not need to be part of dealing with this mechanic, so just don't. For the rest of the duty, there were no major issues. If we ignore that at certain times on Ultima, we had a bunch of deaths, which I shockingly find totally normal. One thing that does surprise me a bit about that fight is that during the Labyrinth phase, there's players that get proximity AoEs and I think sometimes even spread markers. But I hardly ever see them step out of the safety circle when that happens. For the most part, this kind of attack doesn't do enough damage to endanger the raid, but I do find it surprising that no one ever considers it as an option. For duty 7, we have the Guildhest enemy parties, the hardest duty in the game. To be able to get some hits in at the start, I use Swiftcast and make heavy use of Thunder. Once the second pack comes, I just focus the big guy. Surely the tank can take care of the rest since they're the only one with an AoE. For duty 8, we go to Tsukuyomi normal. Overall, this duty is reasonably straightforward. However, just to start, it was quite awkward to get booted out of state for the intermission, so I had to use Lucid Dreaming just to hope I had some more MP. In the second part of the fight, there are 2 specific mechanics I would like to highlight. The one where the floor splits in color. Remember that if you go up to 5 stacks, you die. So make sure to alternate where you are. You have plenty of time. The second thing is when she combines the fan circle AoEs with a stack marker of some sort. Remember that if it is a line stack, you just have to be in the line. However, regardless of its shape, whoever is in the center should consider moving forward to the safe spot from the fan AoEs once there is one, since the rest of the raid is likely to do so. Both of these mechanical combinations have a tendency to catch some players off guard, which is why I feel the need to highlight them. For duty 9, we have Urth's Fount, Odin. That one quote-unquote normal trial that isn't in trial roulette due to being just barely too hard to be considered normal, but too easy to be considered extreme, and also it has a DPS check at the end. That can be bested with 3 players and some echo, by the way. I will say, playing Black Mage at level 50 doesn't feel as hectic as it did in Endwalker, since you only have 1 proc to keep track of. Although Fire 1, Fire 3 due to Firestarter is still a brutal rotation with latency. You know what's really awkward though? Going full blast for the entire fight and then remembering, oh yeah, the DPS check, when you already used Mana Font, which is more like a proper damage cooldown in a way now, so now you instead finish a burst with going into Umbral Ice State and trying to recover to go again while the boss is just about to explode. Finally, for duty 10, we go to the Guildhest flicking sticks and taking names. I don't remember ever doing this one before, but I must have done it given I have it unlocked, right? It requires a lot of movement to keep up, so once again I practice using a more mobile Black Mage rotation, using Transpose as much as possible, and either swift casting a proper spell or casting Scathe in between Transposes and Thunders. It sort of worked. An unfortunately heavy emphasis on Guildhests, but I do think we had some interesting duties this time around. For the next while with this series, I will aim to do a set of Mentor Roulettes with every job, one at a time, which is a great opportunity to also highlight how I play these jobs in a real fight, and also focus more on the fights and my job and mistakes, rather than looking too hard at what other players are doing, although, you know, if someone needs a tip, they can have one. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, if you thought Scathe seemed bad before Dawntrail, a kind of power creep has made it even worse. Thunder 1 does 120 potency up front, and Scathe has, since A Realm Reborn, done 100 potency with a 20% chance to do 200 potency instead, which averages 120 potency. This means that Thunder matches Scathe consistently, without the dot.